I sacrificed my entire life for my grandson, fulfilling his dreams, wiping his tears, and breathing my last breath after my son. But one day, this same grandson took everything that was not mine, my identity, from my hands. He drowned me in the water of his own house, thinking that I would never return. But he did not know that with the old grandmother's breath, the story of his own fate had also begun. My name is Marion Hudson, and I am 65 years old. I live in a quiet neighborhood in Richmond, Virginia, in a house that has seen every chapter of my life: laughter, love, and unbearable loss. The front porch still carries the faint scent of my husband's morning coffee, and the walls still echo with my son's laughter from years ago. I spend my mornings sitting by the window, watching the maple tree outside turn red with autumn. Sometimes, I imagine my son standing there, waving, like he used to before leaving for work. But those days are gone, buried under time and memory. I lost my husband, Charles, years ago. He was a gentle man, calm, steady, and always humming old country songs while fixing things around the house. When he passed away, I thought I had already lived through my share of pain. But fate had more storms waiting. My son, Michael, and his wife, Anna, were taken from me in a car accident one snowy evening. The police said their car slipped on the highway ice and crashed into a barrier. They both died instantly. I remember collapsing when I heard the news. The sound of my own scream still haunts me in my sleep. That night, I looked at 6-year-old Adam, my grandson, sleeping in his small bed, unaware that the world he knew had just disappeared. I promised myself then, with tears soaking my hands, that I would never let him feel alone. He became the purpose I clung to when life had no meaning left. Every breath I took after that night was for him. He was my blood, my reason, my last link to the people I had loved most. Years have passed since then, yet I still remember the way he used to call me Grandma, with a smile that could melt the coldest winter. He had his father's eyes, full of dreams, and his mother's gentle heart. I believed he would grow up to be a good man, the kind his parents would have been proud of. Back then, I didn't know that love, when given without boundaries, can sometimes become the rope that strangles you slowly. When I think back to the early years after the accident, the memories come in flashes, some warm, some heavy, but all painfully clear. Raising Adam alone was not easy, yet it gave me a reason to wake up each morning. I filled the emptiness of my home with the sound of his laughter, the smell of his favorite pancakes, and the quiet comfort of his little footsteps running down the hallway. I often told myself that God had taken my son and daughter-in-law but left me their most precious piece, Adam. I worked part-time at the public library, shelving books, helping visitors find their stories, and losing myself in the quiet rustle of pages. It wasn't much, but it paid the bills and kept my mind steady. Every evening, I'd return home to find Adam waiting by the window. He'd run into my arms and tell me about his day at school, the drawings he made, the games he played, the friends he liked. Those were the moments that kept me alive. I'd look at him and whisper silently, "As long as you smile, I'll be fine." Our house became a small world of two, just a grandmother and her grandson against everything. I made sure he had everything I could afford: clean clothes, good books, warm food, and most of all, love. We'd watch old movies together on weekends, and I'd tell him stories about his father, how Michael loved baseball, how he never gave up on anything. Adam would listen wide-eyed and say, "I want to be like Dad one day." Those words were my comfort. They made me believe that all the sacrifices were worth it. Years rolled by, and Adam grew fast, taller, stronger, sharper. He was bright in school, always at the top of his class, and every teacher praised his manners. Neighbors adored him, saying, "Marion, you've raised a fine young man." I used to smile with pride, pretending that my heart didn't ache whenever I saw other families together. I had lost so much, but I still felt rich, because Adam was my whole world. But life has a strange way of testing the heart when you start to believe the storm is over. It started with small changes, moments I didn't notice at first. Adam stopped sitting with me for dinner, saying he had homework or was too tired. He started closing his door at night and spending more time on his phone. I told myself it was just teenage independence. I didn't know that it was the beginning of a distance I would never be able to close again. One evening, I stood by his room and heard laughter. Not the sweet, innocent laugh I'd known, but a louder, careless one, mixed with unfamiliar voices over the phone. "You're not a child anymore, Marion," I told myself. "He's growing up. Let him live." So I walked away, unaware that with each step, I was walking farther from the grandson I thought I knew. As the years went on, Adam's childhood slowly faded into something distant, like an old photograph losing its color. He finished high school and went off to college in another city. I remember the day I helped him pack. His suitcase was filled with clothes, books, and all the hopes I'd poured into him. I stood by the door and said, "Study hard, Adam. Make your parents proud." He smiled, kissed my cheek, and said, "Don't worry, Grandma. I'll make you proud too." For a long time, I believed him. I believed every word. The first few months after he left, he would call me every weekend. We'd talk for hours, about his classes, his professors, and the friends he'd made. I'd send him little packages with cookies, scarves, and handwritten notes. Sometimes, I'd sit by the phone just to hear it ring, waiting for that familiar "Hi, Grandma." But as time passed, the calls became shorter. Then, they came less often. And eventually, they stopped coming altogether. I told myself he must be busy. Young people had their own lives. But in my heart, I knew something was changing. Something slipping quietly between us. One day, a friend of his called me by mistake, looking for him. The boy's voice on the other end said, "Oh, Adam? He dropped out last semester. Didn't he tell you?" The phone nearly slipped from my hand. I sat there for minutes, unable to breathe. Dropped out? My Adam? The one who wanted to be like his father. I didn't understand. I tried calling him again and again, but every time I reached his voicemail. Weeks later, he finally showed up at my door. Unshaven, eyes tired, and smelling of alcohol. "Grandma," he said, trying to smile, "I just needed a break from everything. College was too much." I wanted to hold him, to scold him, to ask why, but all I did was hug him. My hands trembled as I said, "You could have told me, Adam. You never have to hide from me." He laughed it off and said, "It's fine, Grandma. I've got plans. I'll figure it out." But those plans never came true. He began spending his nights out, coming home at odd hours. I'd hear him stumble through the hallway, whispering to someone on the phone, his voice hushed and angry. Sometimes he wouldn't come home at all. The next morning, I'd find crumpled betting slips in his pockets and the faint smell of whiskey in his clothes. I prayed every night, not just for him to change, but for God to give me strength to love him through the pain. I thought maybe he'd find his way back, that the good-hearted boy I'd raised was still inside him somewhere. But love, I learned, can blind you to the truth when the truth is too painful to face. There were nights when I'd sit alone at the kitchen table, looking at his father's picture and whispering, "Michael, your son is lost. I don't know how to bring him back." The silence in the house felt heavier than ever, a silence that grew louder with every bad decision Adam made. Still, I refused to give up on him. Because when you've buried your own child, you cling to what's left, even if it's breaking you in the process. The change in Adam came slowly, like rust spreading on something once shining. At first, it was harmless. Late nights with friends, missed breakfasts, a hint of arrogance in his voice. "I'm not a kid anymore, Grandma," he'd say whenever I asked where he was going. I wanted to believe it was just youth, a phase that would fade with time. But it didn't fade. It grew darker. He started working odd jobs, but the money never stayed long. I'd sometimes find receipts for bars in his jeans, casino flyers tucked in his jacket. I knew what it meant, but denial can be such a kind liar. I kept convincing myself that maybe he was just socializing, that he wasn't falling the way it seemed. But the truth always finds a way to break through your illusions. One night, around midnight, I woke to the sound of the door slamming. I stepped into the hallway, and there he was, stumbling, smelling of liquor, his eyes dull and red. "Adam," I whispered, "where have you been?" He laughed and said, "Relax, Grandma. I'm not 12. When he brushed past me, I caught a glimpse of his shaking hands. My heart broke. From that day on, peace left our home. Days were filled with worry, nights with prayer. The neighbors began whispering. "That poor old woman," I heard one say, "she raised him alone, and now look at him." I'd pretend not to hear, but every word felt like a thorn pressing deeper. Then the lies began. Small at first, missing money from the grocery envelope, excuses for why his phone was always broken. One afternoon, I found that my husband's old watch, the one he gave me on our 30th anniversary, was missing from the drawer. I confronted Adam that evening. "Did you take your grandfather's watch?" His face turned cold. "It's just a watch, Grandma. Don't be so dramatic." That was the first time he raised his voice at me. I remember sitting on the edge of my bed that night, holding the photograph of my son. "Michael," I whispered, "your boy is lost. He's slipping away from me, and I can't hold on anymore." The house felt haunted, not by ghosts, but by the weight of disappointment. Still, I couldn't stop loving him. No matter how far he fell, a part of me kept believing he'd find his way back. That's what mothers and grandmothers do. We keep forgiving, even when forgiveness turns into weakness. But the day would soon come when love would no longer be enough to save him, or me. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon when everything changed. The sun poured through the curtains, lighting up the same living room where I had once rocked Adam to sleep. I was knitting on the couch when I heard his footsteps, heavy, unsteady, almost angry. He walked in, his shirt half-buttoned, eyes red, and the faint smell of whiskey clinging to him like smoke. "Grandma," he said, his tone unusually calm, "I need to talk to you." I put my knitting aside. "Sit down, Adam. What's going on?" He didn't sit. He stood in front of me, pacing back and forth like a man rehearsing a speech. "I need your help. I've got a plan, a business idea. But I need money to start it. You can help me." I looked at him carefully. "How much are we talking about?" He hesitated, then took a deep breath. "Not money exactly. I need the house." The words hit me like a slap. "The house." I repeated. "Yes," he said quickly, almost desperate. "It's the only valuable thing left. I can sell it, invest the money, and turn my life around. This place doesn't matter anymore, Grandma. You can live somewhere smaller, somewhere quiet. Don't you want me to have a future?" For a long moment, I couldn't speak. The air between us felt heavy, poisonous. I looked around the room, the family photos on the wall, the worn armchair where my husband used to sit, the curtains my daughter-in-law had sewn. Every inch of this house was filled with ghosts, but they were my ghosts. My memories. My life. "Adam," I finally said, my voice trembling, "this house is not just wood and bricks. It's your grandfather's sweat, your father's laughter, and my entire life. I won't sell it." He frowned, his jaw tightening. "You're being stubborn." "I'm trying to help myself. Why can't you understand that?" "Because this isn't help," I said softly. "This is desperation. And desperation built on greed destroys everything it touches." He turned away, muttering under his breath. Then he faced me again, his eyes colder than I'd ever seen. "If you don't give it to me willingly, I'll find another way." "Is that a threat?" I asked. He smirked, but there was no humor in it. "Call it whatever you want. But don't say I didn't warn you." He stormed out, the door slamming so hard that a framed photo fell off the wall and shattered on the floor. It was our family picture. My husband, my son, Anna, and little Adam smiling in my arms. I bent down slowly, picking up the pieces with trembling hands. One shard cut my finger, and a drop of blood fell on Adam's face in the photo. I whispered to myself, maybe this is how love dies. Not in one moment, but piece by piece, like glass breaking in silence. That night, I didn't sleep. I kept replaying his words in my head. I prayed for God to reach him before anger did. But deep down I already knew, the boy I raised was gone, and the man standing in my house was a stranger. The next morning arrived cloaked in an uneasy stillness. The sun glared through the kitchen window, and the air felt heavier than usual, thick, like something terrible was waiting to happen. I made myself a cup of tea, but even its warmth couldn't calm the chill crawling down my spine. I walked out to the backyard, the soft wind brushing against my face. The pool shimmered quietly under the morning light, clear and calm, a mirror of deceptive peace. I was tending to my roses when I heard the sound of the back door creak open. I turned, and there he was, Adam. His hair was messy, his shirt wrinkled, and the smell of alcohol lingered around him like a dark aura. His eyes were bloodshot, but what frightened me most was the emptiness in them. The boy I once knew was gone, only anger remained. "Adam," I said softly, "it's early. Come inside. Let's talk." He shook his head, pacing toward me. "No, Grandma. Talking doesn't help. You never listen." "I've always listened," I whispered, my voice trembling. "But you never hear me." He let out a bitter laugh. "You think you're better than me because you have this house? Because you think you're the saint who raised a lost soul?" I took a cautious step back, feeling the edge of the pool behind me. "This isn't about the house, Adam. This is about your choices." He pointed at me, his hand shaking. "My choices? You think I wanted this life? You think I wanted to lose everything?" His voice cracked. "You could fix all of it with one signature, just one, Grandma." "I can't," I said firmly. "Your grandfather built this home with his hands. Your father grew up here. I've spent my entire life keeping it alive. I won't destroy it now, not even for you." His face twisted with rage. "Then maybe you don't deserve it either." Before I could step away, his hand struck my shoulder, hard, forceful. My foot slipped on the wet tiles. Time froze for a heartbeat. The world tilted. I remember gasping his name as I fell backward, the sky spinning above me. Then, a sharp splash, a rush of cold water swallowing my body whole. The shock stole my breath. I thrashed, but my limbs felt heavy, my chest burning for air. The muffled echo of his footsteps faded as I sank deeper. For a moment, I saw my husband's face, smiling, calm, and then my son's laughter in the distance. The world went dim, the water wrapping around me like glass. But then, through the blur, I saw movement, a figure at the edge of the pool. Voices shouting. Hands reaching. Someone pulled me upward, dragging me into the air that burned my lungs as I gasped and coughed. It was Maria, my housemaid, her clothes soaked, tears streaming down her face. Behind her, two neighbors, Mr. and Mrs. Grayson, rushed to help, shouting for an ambulance. As they lifted me onto the ground, the sunlight hit my face, and I blinked, disoriented. "Adam," I whispered weakly. "Where is he?" Maria looked down, her expression broken. "He ran, ma'am. He just ran." The sirens arrived moments later. As the paramedics carried me away, I looked back at the pool. Calm again, the water still, hiding what had just happened. And for the first time in my life, I didn't see my home as a place of safety. I saw it as a grave, one my own grandson had almost given me. The first thing I heard when I woke up was the soft, rhythmic beeping of a heart monitor. The smell of disinfectant filled the air, sharp and sterile. My chest felt heavy, my throat burned, and when I opened my eyes, the bright hospital lights stung. For a moment, I didn't remember where I was, and then it all came crashing back. The water. The cold. Adam's face twisted in anger. His voice echoing, "Then maybe you don't deserve it either." I tried to sit up, but pain rippled through my shoulders. A nurse hurried over, a young woman with kind eyes and a soft voice. "Please, ma'am, don't move too quickly. You're safe now." "Safe?" I whispered. "Am I?" She hesitated, then offered a small, sympathetic smile. "You're lucky to be alive. You were underwater for nearly 2 minutes before they pulled you out. Another 30 seconds and—" She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. I turned my head slightly and saw Maria sitting in the corner, her hands clasped tightly together, her eyes swollen from crying. When she saw me awake, she rushed to my side. "Oh, thank God," she said, gripping my hand. I thought you were gone." Her tears fell on my arm, and I tried to smile, though my lips trembled. "You saved me," I whispered. "You and the Graysons. You brought me back." Maria shook her head. "No, ma'am. God saved you. But what your grandson did," her voice cracked. "It's unforgivable." I closed my eyes, trying to keep the tears from spilling. The image of Adam's face wouldn't leave me, his anger, his fear, his betrayal. I'd given him everything. My time, my strength, my life. And in return, he'd given me water instead of air. For hours, I lay there in silence, listening to the steady beeping beside me. A doctor came in, spoke gently about my recovery, and left. But inside me, something else was recovering. Not my body but my will. When night fell, the room grew quiet, and I stared out the window at the city lights flickering in the distance. Each light felt like a heartbeat, a reminder that life was still moving, even after betrayal. Maria came back with a blanket. "Ma'am, you need rest," she said softly. "You shouldn't think about anything right now." But I couldn't stop thinking. Rest? How could I rest when the person I loved most had tried to end my life? When the boy I'd raised with my own hands had turned those same hands into weapons? I turned to her and said, "Maria, I've spent my entire life forgiving him. Every lie, every mistake, every disappointment. I thought if I just stayed quiet, things would get better. But silence isn't love. Silence is surrender." She nodded, her eyes filled with worry. "What will you do?" I looked down at my trembling hands, the same hands that had once held his tiny fingers, that had built a life around him, and I whispered, "I'm going to fight back." Maria's eyes widened. "You mean, the police?" "Yes," I said firmly, the words steady despite my shaking voice. "I'm pressing charges. I can't bring my son back. I can't change what happened. But I can make sure his child, my grandson, faces the truth. If I stay silent now, then I'll be as guilty as he is." A tear slipped down Maria's cheek. "You're doing the right thing." I turned my gaze back to the window, watching the moon cast a pale reflection across the dark city. "Maybe," I said softly, "but doing the right thing has never felt so painful." That night, I didn't sleep. My body was weak, but my heart had found a new kind of strength, one born not from love but from justice. And I knew when the sun rose, I would no longer be just a grandmother, I would be a witness. 2 weeks later, I found myself sitting in a cold, echoing courtroom, a place I never imagined I'd be, especially not because of my own flesh and blood. The air smelled of paper, ink, and judgment. My hands trembled slightly as I held my purse in my lap, the sound of whispers filling the space behind me. Every tick of the clock felt like another reminder of what I had lost. Across the room sat Adam, my grandson, the boy I'd once sung lullabies to, now dressed in a suit that didn't fit him right. His face was pale, his eyes hollow. When he looked up and saw me, he didn't smile. He didn't frown either. He just stared, as if he were looking through a stranger. The judge, a stern woman with silver hair and sharp eyes, called the courtroom to order. Case number 1876. The State of Virginia versus Adam Hudson. The prosecutor began speaking, his voice calm but firm, describing how I was found unconscious, how witnesses saw Adam near the pool, how he fled the scene. I felt each word cut deeper than the last. Every detail felt like another wound, not from the law, but from truth itself. Adam's lawyer stood to respond, young and arrogant. "Your Honor, my client deeply loves his grandmother. What happened was an accident, a misunderstanding. She slipped, panicked, and now confusion has turned into false accusation. There's no proof he intended to harm her." The judge glanced at me. "Mrs. Hudson, would you like to speak?" I rose slowly, my knees weak but my voice clear. "Yes, Your Honor." The room fell silent. Every eye turned toward me as I took a deep breath and looked at Adam. "That boy over there," I began, "is my grandson. I raised him since he was 6 years old. I fed him when I was hungry myself. I prayed for him every night, even when I knew he was lying to me. I believed love could save him." I paused, my eyes glistening. But love can't survive without respect. And the day he pushed me into that pool, I saw in his eyes that I no longer mattered, that the woman who gave him everything was nothing to him anymore. Adam looked down, clenching his fists. His lawyer shifted uncomfortably. The prosecutor called Maria to the stand. She testified exactly what she saw, Adam's shouting, the push, his escape. Her voice shook, but her words were steady. Then Mr. Grayson, my neighbor, confirmed it all. How he ran when he heard the scream, how he saw Adam leaving the yard. The defense tried to twist their words, but truth has a way of surviving the noise. When my turn came again, the prosecutor asked gently, Mrs. Hudson, why did you decide to press charges against your own grandson? I hesitated, feeling tears sting my eyes. Because silence is how pain survives, I said quietly. If I don't speak now, then everything I taught him about honesty, about decency, dies with me. I'm not here for revenge, Your Honor. I'm here because no one, not even family, should believe love makes cruelty acceptable. The courtroom stayed silent for a long moment. The judge's expression softened slightly. She looked at Adam, then back at me. You've shown remarkable courage, Mrs. Hudson. After hours of arguments and statements, the judge finally spoke. Based on the evidence and testimony, the court finds the defendant, Adam Hudson, guilty of aggravated assault and attempted manslaughter. The words echoed through the room. Adam's face went pale. His lips parted, but no sound came out. The judge continued, he is hereby sentenced to 5 years in state prison. The gavel struck once, sharp, final. Adam turned his head toward me for the first time that day. His eyes were full of disbelief, maybe even regret. For a moment, I saw the little boy he used to be, the one who once held my hand and promised to make me proud. I wanted to reach out to say something, but there were no words left to fix what he'd broken. As the officers led him away, his voice cracked faintly. Grandma, I didn't mean to. I closed my eyes. Meaning to or not meaning to didn't matter anymore. The truth was what it was. When the courtroom emptied, Maria placed a comforting hand on my shoulder. It's over now, she whispered. But it wasn't. It never truly is when love has to stand against justice. I stood up slowly, turned toward the door, and whispered to myself, no, Maria. It's just beginning. Now I have to learn how to live again, without him, and without the illusions that love is always enough. When I returned home after the trial, the silence felt heavier than ever. The house that once echoed with laughter and footsteps now carried only the faint hum of the refrigerator and the slow ticking of the old grandfather clock in the hallway. Everything looked the same, the framed photographs, the soft beige curtains, the floral couch, but nothing felt the same. Maria had cleaned the place before I came back. She'd folded the blankets, swept the floors, even set fresh flowers on the dining table. It should feel like home again, ma'am, she said quietly. I nodded and thanked her, but deep inside I knew, it would never truly feel like home again. When she left, I walked from room to room, running my fingers across the furniture, the walls, the picture frames. Each one carried the weight of a memory. In the hallway, I stopped by the small table where my husband's pocket watch used to rest, the one Adam pawned months ago. My reflection in the glass cabinet looked older, more fragile, yet somehow calmer. I wasn't angry anymore. The anger had burned itself out and left behind something else, a quiet kind of strength. I stepped into Adam's old room. The bed was still neatly made, though dust had begun to settle on the corners. His old baseball glove lay forgotten on the shelf, next to a photo of him as a child holding his father's hand. I picked up the frame and stared at it for a long time. He had been such a bright boy, curious, loving, full of life. How had he turned into someone who could look at me and feel nothing? The question had no answer. Maybe some stories don't need one. That evening, I made myself a cup of tea and walked out to the backyard. The pool shimmered under the setting sun, still and quiet, as if nothing had ever happened. But I knew better. That water had held my breath, my fear, and my rebirth. It was no longer just a pool. It was a reminder that even life's gentlest reflections can hide its deepest betrayals. I sat in the wooden chair near the garden and let the cool air wash over me. For the first time in months, I felt at peace. Not happy, happiness felt too far away, but peaceful in the way one feels after surviving a long storm. Inside, the house grew dim as the sun slipped behind the trees. I walked back in and stopped before the family portrait hanging on the living room wall, the one we took so many years ago. There was my husband Charles with his arm around me, my son Michael, smiling proudly, Anna holding a young Adam who couldn't stop giggling. We looked perfect, a family that had everything. I reached out and touched the glass over Adam's small face in the picture. My eyes filled with tears, but I didn't cry. Not anymore. I whispered softly, I lost everything, but not my dignity. You're all still here. Your love built this home, not blood. And as long as I breathe, this house will never belong to anyone who doesn't understand that. The clock struck 9. The sound echoed through the still air, solemn but steady, like a heartbeat reminding me that life, even after pain, goes on. I turned off the lights, leaving only the soft glow of the lamp near the photo. The shadows of my past stood quietly beside me, not to haunt, but to remind. And for the first time since that dreadful day, I didn't feel afraid to be alone. I sat in my chair by the window, pulled a blanket over my knees, and whispered to myself, "It's over now." But deep down, I knew it wasn't truly over. Healing doesn't happen in an instant. It happens in quiet breaths, one night at a time. A few months later, winter arrived in Virginia. The air outside was crisp, and the maple tree in my yard had shed its last leaf. I had learned to live alone again, not in sadness, but in quiet acceptance. Every morning, I brewed a single cup of coffee, opened the curtains, and watched the light creep into the house I had fought so hard to keep. One morning, Maria brought in the mail and handed me a single envelope. It was old-fashioned, handwritten, no return address, but I knew that handwriting. My fingers trembled as I tore it open. The letter began simply, "Dear Grandma, I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't even expect you to write back. I think about that day every night, and it feels like drowning again, only this time, I'm the one who can't breathe. I understand now what you meant when you said love without respect is nothing. You were right. I'm trying to change, but I don't know if I ever can. I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry, truly, deeply sorry. I hope someday when you think of me, it's not with hate but with the memory of who I used to be. Adam." I sat for a long time, staring at the letter. Tears blurred the ink until his words looked like shadows on the page. I didn't feel anger anymore, only sorrow for what could have been, for the life we both lost long before the court ever spoke. I folded the letter carefully and placed it beside the family portrait on the mantel. The faces in the picture smiled back at me. Charles, Michael, Anna, and a little boy who once called me his world. I whispered softly, "Perhaps this is what survival means. Not living without pain, but learning to live with it and still finding peace." The clock chimed softly in the background. I walked to the window, the evening sun painting the sky in gold and amber. The wind brushed against the glass, gentle and forgiving. For the first time in years, I didn't feel weak. I didn't feel broken. I was simply alive. And as the light faded and the shadows stretched across the room, I smiled faintly and said to the quiet air, "Justice was done. But love will always remain my lesson." The house stood still, bathed in the final light of the day, holding every memory, every scar, and every heartbeat that had ever lived within its walls. And with that my story, the story of a grandmother who refused to surrender her dignity, came to rest in peace. Thank you for listening to my story. If my journey touched your heart, please take a moment to subscribe to my channel. It helps me keep sharing the voices of those who are often forgotten. And before you go, tell me in the comments where you're listening from, and what time it is there right now. I love seeing how far my story travels, from one heart to another.